And it's hour 3 of our Tuesday morning. Dave Bowman along with us. And in this hour every Tuesday, it's Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. Headline at BillMick.com today. We don't talk anymore. We were living there for the first couple of hours and then took it into violence, as talk tends to do. And apparently in our history, it has done that a good bit. We'll get to that. Links for you on that show page today to Dave Bowman, the Dave Bowman Show, Dave Does History, and What the Fruck, all the work Dave does, and the McPherson Financial Group bringing you this hour of the program. Dave, it's our Liberty 250 series. Where are we going today?
When we left, the Sons of Liberty had organized themselves and were beginning to rabble-rouse, I guess, is the best way to put it. We had this discussion about violence and politics and how this works. And I think
that hadn't stopped for a week, to be honest. But yeah.
I think the big difference is the violence in the Sons of Liberty is less, I don't want to say destructive. It's just not, this random, we're just going to burn stuff down. It's directed, it's intentional, and it's aimed at specific targets, particularly tax stamp collectors and the likes of that. The Stamp Act doesn't last long. The British start realizing that, well, this is a problem. And, of course, the British merchants are upset because the Americans are canceling orders of things from Britain that they would have bought that otherwise would have had these stamps. And so there's this economic blowback in Parliament. The problem, Bill, of course, is that these taxes they're not overwhelming. I mean, that's the hard part to get people to understand. These taxes aren't something that's going to cause people to go broke. They're not going to be spending 30 to 40% of their income on these taxes. The problem is, if they're permitted to stand, where does this end? Where does this go? And that mindset is starting to permeate the American colonies. If we permit them to do this to us this time, what will they do next time? And it isn't long before Parliament, enacting what are known as the Townshend Act in 1767, start to say, well, okay, we're not going to tax paper, but instead we're going to tax paint, lead, and tea. We're going to tax tea because, and this is where things start to get really grinding now, Parliament wants to remind not just the American colonies, but the entirety of the British Empire that we're in charge. We are the only body that can make laws. We don't care about your colonial assemblies. And in fact, they will write this incredible statement when they repeal the Stamp Act about how all of you colonies are of right and ought to be subject, interesting words to choose, to the British Parliament. And we decide what you get to do, not you. And boy, does that kind of set things off. And as these Townshend Act goes into in effect, there's some real resistance to this in Boston. And the Sons of Liberty start protesting. They start burning effigies, more effigies. They start having mock funerals for British officials and for tax acts and that sort of thing. They get their point across. And it gets to the point where the British decide, really the only way to calm this down, this is traditional British thinking, Bill. The only way to calm things down is to send in the troops. And so they pull 2 regiments off of duty on the American frontier where they're guarding against the Indians and their uprisings. And they send 2 full regiments, the 14th and the 29th, to Boston. And the idea here is, well, these troops, they'll calm things down, right? Because that always works.
And we'll see how it plays out in just a minute on WMMB. So we send the troops in, Dave, and all of a sudden things are just fine. There are no problems at all.
Right. That's the way it always works, right?
No.
Of course, it just increases tensions. And, of course, one of the things that they do, Bill, is they quarter the troops in Boston. They force the troops to be quartered amongst people's houses. You will give up your space. You will give up your time. You will give up your property to us. And we will have troops in your home watching what you're doing. And the idea here, of course, is intimidation. It is control, and it is infuriating to Bostonians. Now, the interesting thing here is that one of these units actually gets along really well with the Bostonians. They're not necessarily welcomed in the sense of open arms, but they are respectful in people's homes, and they're invited to parties and that sort of thing. The other one, not so much. And as time goes by, tensions are going to grow in the city of Boston. As more and more of this Sons of Liberty resistance continues to grow, more and more people are having to choose sides. We've talked in the past about a third of the country is patriot, a third is loyalist, and a third just doesn't care. In Boston, it's not quite that third. It's more on the lines of 75-25. But those 25% who are remaining loyal are pretty vocal about it. They're pretty intense about it. And as the resistance to some of these taxes becomes more intense, the Sons of Liberty and the American merchants start boycotting British goods. But the loyalists and their business, they don't necessarily do that. And so the Sons of Liberty go around to these loyalist businesses, and they put signs on their doors and on their windows that say, don't do business with this guy. He's a loyalist. Boycott him. One of these businesses gets upset about this sign. And on February 22nd, 1770, the business owner goes outside and tears the sign down. He's not going to put up with this. You're not going to intimidate me, sort of thing. And outside his place of business there are a group of, well, as Vinny would have said, Utes. And these Utes are harassing him. That's what they're doing. They're just teasing him. They're insulting him. They're being mean to him. They're heckling him for being a loyalist and being willing to deal with the king and Parliament. In one of the, I guess it's a typical thing in history. I guess it's one of those sad things. This business owner, who has not been hit by anything, he's not been assaulted, he's not been hurt in any way, physically, just snaps. He's had enough. And he goes back inside, and he comes out with a gun. And in the ensuing melee, he manages to kill a 12-year-old boy who was either in the mob or part of the mob. It's not really clear. Kid by the name of Christopher Sider. And Christopher Sider doesn't die instantly. He's shot in the chest, and he's taken to the office of Dr. Joseph Warren, who is a member of the Sons of Liberty and one of the leading Bostonians and one of the leading people who is going to really drive revolutionary fervor. In fact, he will be a part of the Battle of Bunker Hill a year from now. He can't save him. And the boy dies. And this stuns Boston. Now we've got violence. Now we've got a 12-year-old kid killed. And this, of course, is turned into a political advantage by the Sons of Liberty. It becomes political theater. Never let a good crisis go to waste, Bill. 2,000 Bostonians in a city of just 15,000 people, 2,000 of them will show up to march in his funeral march. Church bells will ring, eulogies will be full of rhetoric about tyranny and blood sacrifice. And Sam Adams, of course, is in his element. He has the first martyr to the revolution. It's a symbol of British brutality youthful innocence, and most importantly, imperial arrogance. And this will not be allowed to stand. But the snows are starting to fall in Boston as things heat up.
And we'll see where it all takes us as Dave Does History continues in moments on Bill Mick Live. Our hour being brought to you by the McPherson Financial Group. If you want to follow us on Instagram, you can do it at WMMB Radio. Hey, do me a favor while you got a minute. Make sure you set WMMB as your number one preset on that iHeartRadio app. So many people have. Thank you. We appreciate that. And we're back in moments with more.
This is Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live.
The McPherson Financial Group bringing you the hour. Thanks for spending your time with us here on 92.7 FM WMMB or at BillMick.com, wherever you're finding us, and glad that you are. Dave, we've got things stirring up in Boston. It kind of fits the theme of the day, language to action to violence to more.
Less than 2 weeks after Christopher Sider is killed, it's 9 p.m. on a very cold March evening, March 5th, as a matter of fact, and a young man by the name of Edward Garrick. He's just 16 years old, Bill, which, again, a 16-year-old in 1770 is a little bit different than a 16-year-old today, but he's an apprentice, he's already got a job, but he's a young man. And he's out walking around the streets of Boston, and he strolls past the Customs House, which is located on King Street in Boston. There he sees a British private by the name of Hugh White. He's one of the British sentries that's been stationed there. And he starts heckling Private White. He actually accuses Private White of stiffing the barber on his haircut bill. You know, that's an insult in 1770. You didn't pay your barber's bill. White doesn't take this very well. He turns the words become very sharp, and he takes the rifle that he's carrying, the musket, and he uses the butt end of the musket to kind of strike Garrett with his musket. Just kind of hits it. Boom, go away. That little action, that little move, does what British tax policy hasn't been able to do yet. It turns into a crowd. Passerbys stop to see what's going on. People start whispering. They start talking about it. The city is already on edge, and now you've got a British soldier hitting a 16-year-old boy. Bells start ringing in the city. Now, normally this is a signal that a fire has broken out, but this time it's not a fire. People come pouring out of the taverns and the side streets. They come running to the Customs House, where the private now stands with his back against the wall. He's alone. He's completely outnumbered, and he has a hostile crowd screaming at him for daring to hit this young man with his rifle butt. Someone runs to the British sentry house. There he gets Captain Thomas Preston. He marches in with 7 soldiers, 7 more. They've got loaded muskets. They've got bayonets fixed. And he puts them in a defensive line in front of Private White. Behind them are the stone walls of the Customs House. And in front of them is this angry British mob that has seen too many taxes, too many redcoats, and a couple of weeks ago, too much blood in the snow. The heckling continues to grow. Someone in the crowd throws a snowball. Then snowballs aren't quite as effective as ice chunks. They start throwing ice chunks at the British soldier. They start throwing clubs. And because it's Boston, Bill, they throw oyster shells and even chunks of firewood. The soldiers, shoulder to shoulder, eyes are darting. I mean, these are young men, too. Their hearts are pounding, and eventually one of them, a guy by the name of Private Hugh Montgomery, gets hit hard enough by some of this ice and oyster shells, it knocks him down. He gets up, he shouts, and he pulls the trigger. And that first musket ball fired triggers a chaotic volley from the British soldiers. And when all is said and done, the American Revolution has, for all real intents and purposes, begun.
So, Dave, we got basically the first shot of the revolution going on here?
In many ways. Many people consider this to be the opening volley of the American Revolution. In some ways it's not, but the point is that 5 men are now dead in the streets of Boston. 5 civilians have been killed by the soldiers in the streets of Boston. Among them, Crispus Attucks. He is considered to be the first martyr, as it will, of the American Revolution. He is a black man. He is a sailor. We could spend hours talking about Crispus Attucks, but he is considered by most to be the first martyr of the Revolution. Captain Preston is desperately trying to get a hold of his men. He's trying to rein all this in. He's trying to get control of things. But with 5 dead, it's a problem. The Crown, the British, will later refer to this as a riot. Of course, Boston will call this a massacre. Paul Revere, everybody knows that name because Paul Revere is going to ride through the night in a couple of years. But for now, Paul Revere is a silversmith. And because art is different in this era, he's using his silversmithing skills to create images of the Boston Massacre, which are widely propagated throughout the colonies and actually throughout the world, showing these British troops just mowing down Americans without any concern whatsoever. It's very effective propaganda, even to this day. We call it the Boston Massacre. We don't call it the Boston Riot. It showed peaceful colonists, just doing their peaceful thing at 9 o'clock at night, and this organized British attack. The British accounts of the incident are essentially played down. And there is this growing tension. These people murdered American colonials in the streets. They are, for all practical purposes, the British government. I mean, they're your troops. You put them here. You did this. The problem is, Bill, it's like most of history. Is this really what happened? The Sons of Liberty are trying desperately, as they did with Christopher Sider, to turn this into a political event. And they are succeeding in many ways in convincing the public that the British have done this and the British are evil and can't be trusted, and this is they've come this far. What will they do next? They're shooting us down in the streets. Now will they start shooting us down in our homes? The propaganda element is working through all of this. But there's one member of the Sons of Liberty who's looking at this differently. John Adams, yes, that John Adams, is very concerned because he wants to maintain the moral high ground. He knows that this was just a riot. He knows that this was the crowd really harassing these troops and causing this to happen. And he is going to stand up and say, look, we have to do what's right. Because by doing what's right, what do the scriptures say? It's like pouring coals on the head of your enemy. If we handle this correctly, put these guys on trial properly, and make sure that we follow our own laws, it'll look even worse for the crown, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. But more importantly, we'll do the right thing. And John Adams agrees to be their defense attorney. He's going to be criticized for it, but he will say later it's one of the things that he is most proud of.
And we get into that part of the story when Dave Does History continues in moments. It's also our segment where if you want to weigh in, we let you do it at 321-768-1240 or hit us up on the Talkback feature. We're back in moments.
Call Bill now, 321-768-1240.
The McPherson Financial Group bringing you our final hour of a Tuesday morning together. And if it's that, it's Dave Does History. And in our final segment, we'll take your thoughts and comments on the history Dave's bringing to us today, which is the Boston Massacre and the aftermath of that. We're getting ready to jump into the trial. Where are we going, Dave?
See, even Bill calls it the Boston Massacre. because that's what's entered our lexicon. That's how we think of it, even though it might not have actually been that. John Adams, who as a founding father is one of our leading founding fathers, he is not necessarily known to be a member of the Sons of Liberty, but he's closely working with Sam Adams. He is absolutely insistent that these soldiers have to be tried in civilian court. They can't be sent to a military tribunal under the British government. They have to be tried by civilians, because this is important that we show the principles for which we are actually fighting, arguing for. He is committed to the rule of law over mob violence. And the Sons of Liberty sort of understand this. They don't necessarily like it, but they understand the principle that is involved here. Now, John Adams will be roundly criticized for much of this, but again, he will be proud of the fact, to the day he dies, of the fact that he stood up for what he saw as the rule of law. There are actually two trials here, one for the captain and one for the other 8 soldiers. So Preston will go on trial by himself. The other 8 soldiers will go on trial by themselves. It's overseen by a panel of 3 judges, Bill, the Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Superior Court, an Associate Justice, and a guy who happens to be another Associate Justice, but he is a loyalist, and he will be loyal to the Crown even throughout the Revolutionary War. Now, these are respected colonial judges. They are appointed under the Crown's authority, and they are still functioning within the colonial legal system, but they are judges of the Crown. They're going to try to maintain order, and they're going to try to keep, tensions from inflaming any further. Both of these trials are going to have local juries, but not from Boston. Just like today, there's this idea of a fair, jury, a tainted jury. And Adams knows that if he allows a Boston jury to be impaneled, it doesn't matter what the facts are. It doesn't matter what really happened. A Boston jury is going to convict all of these people, and that's not what he needs. So he actually gets a country jury from people outside of Boston to come in and serve as the jury, hear the trial, and serve as the jury. Long story short, because we don't have time to go through the whole thing, remember, all history is editorial. The trials are conducted. 6 of the soldiers are going to be acquitted. 2 will be convicted of manslaughter. And the penalty for being so is they get branded on the thumb. They get a brand that they, committed this act. This belief that Adams had in justice, even for unpopular clients, is not just lasting pride for him. I think in many ways it's lasting pride for us as Americans, even though we still call it the Boston Massacre. Almost said Boston Massacre. Even though we still think of it in those terms, even though our images of the Boston Massacre are still those that are propagated by Paul Revere and others, we still understand, even if we don't necessarily know it, that the right thing was done in the end, that the trial was held under civilian, that the penalties, while unusual to us, perhaps cruel and unusual to us, were not considered that in that era. And the right of the law was upheld. This massacre, however, enters the lexicon, and it becomes a focal point for resistance. It becomes this belief then that the British Crown, again, the fear was, if we allow them to tax us, where will they stop? And the mindset now becomes, and in most Americans, well, where they'll stop is shooting us down in the streets. And we can't have that. We have to have our own country. We have to have our own government. We have to be not subject to Parliament. In England, there's a great deal of outrage over this. How dare the colonials not just harass our troops into this, but then dare to put them on trial and dare to convict 2 of them, even though the sentence was again, probably not all that severe. But for once, smarter minds prevail, and the troops are temporarily at least removed from Boston. They're taken out, and most of the Townshend acts that caused much of this tension are repealed. They repeal the tax on paint and lead and shipbuilding and those kinds of things, but they leave one tax in place. Want to guess what that tax is? Tea. And why does the British government choose to tax tea? This is one of those questions that kind of vexes us in many ways throughout our history. It shouldn't. They choose to leave the tax on tea in place because, like other governments, they have their hands in other places. And the British government has a huge problem with one of their business endeavors with a company that's too big to fail. The East India Tea Company, which is a company that imports tea from India to the rest of the British colonies, has gotten itself into a financial mess. And they have had to be bailed out by the British government. Well, of course, the British government wants its money back. And since they're selling their tea to the colonials and to everyone else, they figure, well, we'll just tax the tea and make back the money that we invested, so to speak, in the East India Tea Company to keep them from going under and costing us our Indian colonies, which we fought so hard for against the French not that long ago. It's it's not all that unusual from government today, Bill. The government's getting involved with businesses. It's picking the winners and losers. And it's trying to pay for it on the backs of the people that really don't want this. And so they're going to leave that tax on tea in place. It's not a huge tax. In fact, even with the tax, it's still cheaper than imported tea from, say, the Dutch East India Company or smuggled by other people. But it's the principle of the thing. And if they can tax this tea and make us pay this for their own stupidity of getting involved with other businesses, where does that end? Does it end with them shooting us in the streets over tea taxes? Or does it end with them realizing that this is a bad idea? Well, it's the British government, so I think we all know where that's going to end up. But in the meantime, things kind of calm down for a little while, but as we all know, it's not going to last long.
And we pick it up in 1 minute. You want in, now's the time. 321-768-1240 on WMMB. Back to Dave Does History. And Dave, I know you saw it. I saw it, the HBO miniseries on John Adams. And I thought it covered this trial part of this very, very well. And it's a very good series for folks who might want to catch up on a historic recreation thereof.
You know, it's one of the few cases where the TV series, John Adams, which is based on the book by David McCullough, John Adams, is in some ways is better than the book. The book really kind of glosses over this, which is surprising to me. I have, as you know, I put together a bibliography for this. I think I've sent it to you. But it grows by the day. But one of those books that's highly recommended reading is John Adams by David McCullough. But it really does gloss over this. So yeah, watching that is fascinating. And of course, it's drawn directly from the transcripts of that, drawn directly from the records of that trial. So it is very historically accurate. And it's just, it's very intense to be there. And you get that feeling that John Adams would have had in putting up with this idea that he's standing up for what's right. What's surprising about this, Bill, is to go back to what we were talking about in the last hour with this unwillingness that so many have today to stand up and say what is right at the potential cost of their friends, their businesses, their whatever. John Adams didn't feel that way. He knew that this was right. He knew that he had to do it. He knew that it was best for the country, and it wasn't going to be easy, but he did it anyway. And we shouldn't forget that. Well, the Boston Massacre is a huge milestone in where we're going with this whole thing. It certainly is part of the violence that's going to lead to where we're going to end up. But at the same time, you almost have to ask the question, was it contrived? Was it on purpose? And what if John Adams hadn't stepped up and defended those soldiers? What if the mob had been allowed to take the action that night, or a Boston jury had been impaneled? Or what if the British had put them under a military tribunal and not allowed the civilian courts to try them? All of these things could have been better might not have been as good a leadership. Would it have avoided the escalation or not? I don't think it would have, but it certainly draws a lot of parallels to today.
Could have exacerbated it, and I think that Adams's actions was the start of preserving civility in what this new country was going to be. Started crafting it. It's like, look, we need to be a nation of laws. We need to act and perform under those and show that it can be done.
One of the things that he had written earlier during the Stamp Act crisis was about how the people have a right to know the character and conduct of their rulers. And you can kind of see that in this. He's a leader. He's not necessarily a ruler at this point, and he's certainly not the president at this point. But he certainly believes that the character and conduct of the people who are in charge is what has to be on display. There should be no question of these kind of things. And so that's part of why he pushes so hard for this. It's an amazing moment in our history. And you're right, it's one that doesn't get, we have Paul Revere's engravings. We don't necessarily have Paul Revere's paintings of John Adams doing the defense.
Yeah, that's very true. Interesting that this ties together on a day where we've talked about media influence, communication influence, and where people go based on what they believe. And it was a great tie into the day. Dave Bowman, appreciate all your work on Dave Does History. That's well done, sir.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next week for Benjamin Franklin Becomes a Revolutionary.
That will work. And the McPherson Financial Group brought you the hour. I'll see you tomorrow for Wide Open Wednesday. Have a good day, everybody.